You chase, you grind, you fight, and yet nothing seems to bend to your will. That's because you were taught that force equals progress, that effort equals outcome. But there's a truth hidden in plain sight. One Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The more you push, the more the world resists. And the moment you stop trying to control everything, it starts falling into place. Not because you gave up, but because you finally learned the power of doing less. There's a strange kind of authority that only silence can generate. A weight that presence alone carries. People who do less, who speak less, move less, demand less, somehow hold more space than the ones scrambling for attention. Why? Because stillness demands explanation. It begs interpretation. And in the absence of noise, the mind of everyone else rushes to fill the void you've created. Machiavelli wasn't obsessed with action. He was obsessed with control, but not the obvious kind. Not the barking orders or the frantic movements. He knew the strongest power is the one that doesn't announce itself. It waits. It listens. It calculates. And then it moves once, with precision. Think about how people behave in power. The ones who truly have it don't need to constantly prove they do. The king doesn't need to shout. The general doesn't run around the battlefield. The master strategist sits, observes, lets others make the first move. That's the paradox. Doing less but gaining more. And it's not just about appearance. It's tactical. The less you do, the fewer mistakes you make. The less you expose, the more people project onto you. Your silence becomes their imagination's canvas. Your restraint becomes interpreted as mastery, and they start thinking you know something they don't, that you're holding back because you can afford to, that you have options, power, insight, when in reality all you've done is stop trying so hard. There's a reason the quietest person in the room is often the one everyone watches. It's not just mystery, it's psychological leverage. When you speak sparingly, people listen more closely. When you act with reluctance, your actions gain weight. When you seem unbothered, others start to feel the need to earn your attention. That's not magic. That's design. That's psychological economy. And it's how Machiavelli would have played today's world. Not by reacting to everything, but by mastering the art of selective action. Every time you react, you're spending capital, emotional capital, social capital, strategic capital. You might think it's harmless responding to that insult, chasing that opportunity, fixing every little mistake, but each action chips away at your perceived value. You become predictable, accessible, controllable, and once people figure out your pattern, you're not a threat anymore. You're just another player on the board they've already studied. Machiavelli knew that visibility is a trap. The more you're seen, the easier you are to understand. The more you speak, the more your weaknesses leak through. The more you justify, the more doubt you create. That's why doing less isn't about laziness, it's about strategic invisibility. You're there, but not fully. Present, but unreadable. Active, but in ways only you choose. And that makes people nervous. Not because you're dangerous, but because they can't categorize you. You're not seeking validation, not signaling neediness, not betraying your intentions. That makes you untouchable. Because power isn't always in what you say, it's in what you withhold. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them wonder what you're planning. That ambiguity is a weapon, because while they're busy decoding you, they're exposing themselves. And when the time comes, you strike once cleanly. And it feels inevitable, as if it was always going to happen that way. Because you didn't waste your force on half measures. You reserved it, sharpened it, until it mattered. Look at any situation where someone flipped the power dynamic without saying a word. A leader who enters the room and says nothing, but everyone straightens up. A negotiator who lets the silence drag on just long enough that the other party folds. A lover who doesn't chase, doesn't text back, and suddenly becomes 10 times more desirable. These aren't coincidences. They're psychological plays rooted in restraint, in presence, in doing less. But this isn't just about external strategy, it's about internal dominance. When you stop reacting to every trigger, You build inner gravity. You no longer run toward every shiny object, beg for approval, or panic at discomfort. You become centered, focused. The world spins around you, not the other way, around. And that scares people because it means you're not being moved by the same forces that move them. You're not controlled by urgency, noise, emotion. You've detached from the puppet strings they rely on to pull others. And now you're unpredictable. Not in a chaotic way, but in a sovereign one. This is what Machiavelli understood when he advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, but never actually become those things to a fault. Appearances cost you nothing. Performance costs you everything. So if you can achieve the same perception by doing less, why burn yourself out trying to earn it? The less you do, the more others must interpret your moves, the more they must guess, and in that guessing, they become uncertain. They second-guess us themselves. They start to adjust to you even when you haven't done anything. That's the secret. Control doesn't always require action. Sometimes it requires the exact opposite. And this even applies to ambition. There's a kind of quiet ambition, one that doesn't announce goals, doesn't post updates, doesn't seek applause. It moves like a shadow, works behind closed doors, builds momentum while others are performing progress. And when it emerges, it's already done, already undeniable. That's when the world pays attention, not when you're asking for it, but when you no longer need it. So maybe that's the shift. Stop trying to prove yourself through action. Start proving yourself through control. Stop measuring success by how busy you look. Start measuring it by how strategically quiet you can be. Every moment you don't react is a moment you gain advantage. Every silence you hold creates discomfort in someone else. Every step you don't take forces others to make theirs first. Because here's the truth. People move fast when they're afraid. They act impulsively when they feel behind. And if you can remain still, calculated, observant, you'll always stay ahead. Not by running, but by letting them exhaust themselves trying to figure out what you're not doing. That's the irony of power. It isn't in the noise, it's in the pause before it. And once you understand that, you start playing the game very differently. You begin to see the power in patience. Not the passive kind, but the kind that stares straight through chaos without blinking. That listens when others are yelling. That waits not because it doesn't know what to do, but because it knows exactly when to do it. Machiavelli didn't believe in hesitating out of fear. He believed in waiting because timing is everything. And when you act too soon, you turn strength into weakness. But when you wait until the moment is ripe, even the smallest move can tip the entire board. This is why restraint isn't about being timid. It's about being so secure in your position that you don't feel the need to flinch. It's about knowing that most battles are lost, not from being outmatched, but from being too reactive. You don't win because you fought harder. You win because you didn't waste your energy fighting battles that didn't matter. The truth is, most people are addicted to movement. They feel uncomfortable when they're not doing something, saying something, proving something. They equate visibility with value, motion with meaning. And because of that, they become predictable, easy to read, easy to manipulate. All someone has to do is pull the right string and they'll jump, explain, defend, act. But the one who resists that urge, the one who just watches, becomes untouchable. Imagine two chess players. One makes moves quickly, confidently, always pressing forward. The other sits back, taking time, barely touching a piece. Who's more dangerous? The first seems aggressive, maybe even talented, but the second is terrifying because they're not showing their hand. They're not giving you anything to study. Their silence forces you to second-guess every move you make. That's the psychological terrain Machiavelli operated on. He understood that dominance isn't always imposed. It can be absorbed like gravity. And that kind of power can't be stolen. It can only be surrendered to. This concept even plays out in social dynamics. You've seen it. Someone enters a room and instantly starts talking, trying to own the space with words, but the room doesn't bend. Then another person walks in and says nothing. Maybe they just nod. Maybe they just sit. But within minutes, all the attention drifts toward them. Not because they demanded it, but because they didn't. There's something in human nature that's drawn to what isn't explained, to what isn't obvious. And that means the less you do, the more others must supply the meaning. That's power. That's control without command. Influence without words. That's what Machiavelli mastered. Not just manipulation through action, but manipulation through absence. You can even use this principle in your personal relationships. When you stop over-explaining, over-texting, over-apologizing, you regain balance because people feel your pull more when they notice your absence. Your energy becomes scarce. And anything that's scarce becomes valuable, whether it's time, attention, or presence. The mistake most people make is flooding others with availability. They confuse giving with bonding. But true influence is built through contrast, through silence, through pauses between words, not just the words themselves. This is why you must unlearn what the world taught you about hustle. Yes, work ethic matters. Yes, initiative matters. But when it comes to perception, action isn't always king. Sometimes stillness is. Sometimes holding your tongue for 1 extra second gives you the upper hand in a conversation. Sometimes not emailing back immediately makes you seem more in demand. Sometimes letting a conflict breathe for a day diffuses it without you lifting a finger. These are the micro decisions that shape macro outcomes. Not flashy, not loud, but deeply powerful. Machiavelli would have called them the invisible strings, the quiet levers of control that don't look like control at all. Now look around. How much of your life have you spent trying to prove something? Trying to explain who you are, what you're worth, why you deserve to be respected. Every time you do, you give power to someone else's perception. You place your value in their hands. But when you stop, when you let your actions speak at the right time and stay silent when it doesn't serve you, you flip the dynamic. You no longer need to prove because people start believing you don't have to, and that alone makes them pay attention. Here's the strange twist. When you do less, your few actions matter more. One word has weight. One gesture creates impact. One absence causes curiosity. It's like a whisper in a quiet room. It gets heard clearer than a scream in a noisy one. So instead of trying to flood your life with noise, start creating silence that demands interpretation. You'll notice something else start to happen too. Opportunities come to you, not because you chase them, but because people are drawn to gravity. You become the sun instead of the planet, the center instead of the orbit. That's what Machiavelli would have wanted. Not just movement, but movement that circles around you. Influence that you don't have to manufacture. Presence that doesn't require explanation. It's not easy. Restraint takes more strength than action. Patience is harder than reacting. Silence is more uncomfortable than shouting. But the reward, you start operating on a completely different level, a quieter level, a more dangerous one. Because while everyone else is playing checkers at full speed, you're playing chess in slow motion. And every piece you move counts. The ones who gain the most in life aren't always the ones doing the most. They're the ones who choose their moves like they matter, who speak like every word has a cost, who appear only when it serves them, who watch, wait, and then strike so precisely that everyone forgets how long they waited, because all they remember is the result. So ask yourself, are you playing for appearance or for outcome? Are you trying to look powerful or actually be powerful? Because the real ones don't broadcast. They build quietly, slowly, intentionally. And when the moment comes, they don't need to say a word. Everyone already feels it. And once people feel it, they start to change around you. Not because you force them, but because your presence recalibrates the room. The rules they followed before suddenly don't apply. They hesitate before speaking. They double-check before disagreeing. They second-guess their instincts, not because you threatened them, but because you didn't. That absence of need, of performance, of constant assertion, it's unnerving. It makes people search for your edges and find none. And that absence becomes your edge. This is where most people misunderstand influence. They think it's built by doing more, posting more, speaking more, hustling more. But the ones who truly hold power in any space are those who create an emotional silence in others. A pause, a mental blank spot. And you don't create that by flooding attention. You create it by removing your hunger for it. You stop performing. You stop broadcasting. You stop trying to prove you're in the room and start making the room prove it's worthy of your energy. Machiavelli would say, never appear desperate to be needed, because the moment people sense that you want their approval, your position drops. But if you seem like you could walk away at any moment and still thrive, they lean in, they invest, they follow. Not because you asked, but because your indifference feels like power. And that power can stretch into everything. Your relationships, your business, your social presence. Every interaction becomes a moment where you either spend your influence or increase it. Most spend, a few accumulate. And the ones who accumulate are the ones who understand this. Action is currency, and silence is interest. Let it compound. But let's bring this into reality, into the kinds of daily choices you actually face. When someone insults you and you don't respond, not because you're scared, but because you don't recognize their opinion as valuable, that's doing less and gaining more. When everyone's jumping on a trend or scrambling for attention, and you hold back, waiting, watching, letting the chaos burn itself out, that's doing less and gaining more. When a room full of people argues and you listen quietly, saying just one sentence that shifts the entire tone, again, less and more, these moments add up. They don't feel massive, but they build a reputation, a quiet power, and people start to expect that you see things they don't. That maybe you know, something they haven't figured out yet. That's the leverage of restraint. It creates the illusion of wisdom even if you're still figuring it out yourself. And maybe you are. Maybe half the time you're not sure what to say or what move to make. But here's the trick. If you wait long enough, people will fill in the gaps for you. They'll assign meaning to your silence. They'll interpret your hesitation as calculation. They'll assume your absence is a sign of something deeper. That's not deception. That's discipline. It's using the psychology of perception in your favor instead of fighting against it. But discipline is the hard part, right? Because we live in a world where silence is uncomfortable, where patience looks like laziness, where waiting feels like failure. And yet the most successful operators in any domain are the ones who know when not to act, when not to speak, when to let others unravel themselves while they simply observe. Observation is a power play, not in the obvious way, but in the way that reveals everything without saying anything. The longer you stay silent, the more people expose themselves, their insecurities, their egos, their real agendas. They rush to fill the vacuum you've created, and in doing so, they give you the map. This is what separates amateurs from tacticians. Amateurs try to win by rushing. Tacticians win by waiting. And Machiavelli, he was never in a rush. He understood that speed often comes at the cost of clarity. And clarity is what turns small moves into devastating ones. So when the world pulls you to act, pause. When you feel the urge to explain, don't. When you're tempted to correct, to prove, to react, ask yourself, is this increasing my power or spending it? Sometimes the best move is no move. Not forever, but for just long enough that everyone else exposes their cards first. Because in most games of power, the person who speaks second wins. The one who waits gains leverage. The one who doesn't flinch builds gravity. And gravity is what draws everything to it without moving at all. Think about the people in your life who made the biggest impact. Were they loud? Were they constantly visible? Or did they move with precision? Did they speak only when it mattered? Did their absence linger longer than others' presence? That's the frame you want to operate in. Not trying to dominate every space, but letting space bend around you. Not demanding attention, but becoming so rare, so intentional, that attention becomes involuntary. It doesn't mean you never act. It means you act from position, not from emotion. You speak to shape, not to soothe. You move because it serves the outcome, not because you're afraid of being forgotten. Because people don't forget what unsettled them. And silence, well used, is deeply unsettling. It raises questions that noise can never answer. It makes people unsure of their place with you. Unsure of how much you know, how much you care, how much you see, and that uncertainty is power. Machiavelli didn't need to say this out loud. He lived it through his strategies. He advised rulers not to reveal their whole hearts, not to let people know their entire nature, and by extension, not to act unless necessary, because every action reveals a piece of your game, and every revelation weakens your advantage. So the next time you feel pressure to respond, to be visible, to jump into the chaos, remember this. The less you do, the more space you give others to trip, the more mystery you create, the more gravity you build, and the more power you gain without ever lifting a finger. Eventually, you stop seeing power as something to chase. You start to recognize it as something that builds when you remove the need to constantly show it. You don't enter every conversation to win. You enter to listen, to observe, to collect patterns. And while others talk themselves into corners, expose their insecurities, or try to dominate the air, you can serve. You let your silence accumulate like interest in a forgotten bank account until one day everyone realizes you own the room without ever trying to. That's the game Machiavelli understood better than anyone. Restraint as dominance, patience as a strategy, silence as a sharpened blade. And when you start living this way, everything shifts. You no longer panic when someone questions you. You no longer scramble to explain. You no longer feel the need to impress anyone, because you've realized that real power doesn't announce itself, it watches. There's a reason lions don't roar until they have to, and when they do, the jungle listens. Not because of the noise, but because of the silence that came before it. Because everyone knew. When it finally speaks, it means something. That's the level you're trying to reach. Not constant motion, but constant pressure. Not frantic action, but calculated presence. You walk into situations and let others adjust around you. Not because you're arrogant, but because you've trained yourself not to flinch, not to overreach, not to dilute your energy trying to control everything at once. You've stopped playing for attention and started playing for control. That's the shift, and it's a subtle one. You don't go around cutting people off or acting too cool to care. That's insecurity, wearing a mask. What you do is quieter. You delay responses not out of disrespect, but to show you don't operate on borrowed urgency. You say less not because you have nothing to add, but because your words aren't free. You let people misunderstand you, not because you can't clarify, but because their assumptions don't affect your reality. That's a different breed of strength, a strength rooted in self-possession. And once you operate from that place, you begin to attract what you used to chase: respect, curiosity, influence. Because people feel the difference between someone trying to be powerful and someone who simply is. And strangely, the less you do to maintain it, the more it grows. You become like a fixed point in a spinning world. While everyone else gets whiplash from chasing validation, you remain steady. While others stretch themselves thin trying to be seen, you become valuable by being rare, and that rarity multiplies your presence. Your absence starts to mean something. Your disinterest starts to create desire, and your calmness becomes the loudest message in the room. But let's be real, it's not easy. The world rewards noise. It celebrates hustle. It promotes visibility. So choosing to pull back, to be strategic instead of reactive, feels like going against the grain. And in a way it is. But Machiavelli didn't play the game everyone else was playing. He played the game beneath it. The one where attention isn't the prize, leverage is. So when you start operating like this, it's not about doing nothing. It's about doing what matters. It's about trading volume for value, swapping urgency for timing, choosing precision over presence. And ironically, that's when people start to follow you. Not because you asked, but because your stillness has a pull. Your silence becomes a signal. Your restraint becomes an invitation for others to lean in closer to figure you out, to win your attention. They start adjusting their pace to match yours. And that's when you know you've won. When others slow down, not because they're weak, but because your calmness made them realize how loud they've been. And now you're not reacting to the world. You're shaping it quietly, invisibly, irresistibly. That's the end goal. To live in such a way that every move you make, every word you choose to say or not say, creates impact. That your non-response carries more weight than someone else's entire argument. That your absence disrupts more than someone else's presence. Because when you do less, but do it right, you don't need to do more. You just need to hold the line. Let others burn themselves out, proving things you already know. Let them reveal their strategies. Let them fill the space you've left behind. And when you finally choose to step forward, do it like it was always yours to begin with. Because it was. You were just waiting for everyone else to run out of breath.